for as long as you want to. I'll keep having you back.
That's how
I would love to.
We can talk about social media and mental health after this, and be like,
well,
it just wants infinite content from you. So
I don't know what to do. I have no idea how to make that happen. Well, hopefully we have an idea of what we're talking about today, because, folks, this is a 15-Minute Friday. Welcome to the show. This is where myself and a returning guest, we sit down one more time. You're hearing him talk. Adam Lehman back on the show to talk to me this time, not about your story. We're not taking the deep dive. We're going to take a very specific dive into one specific subject for this episode. I'm going to start our clock as it begins. So this is one I've already told you. I'm going to toss the floor to you, and I am going to listen and absorb because I feel like this is just outside of my understanding of anything. Employee ownership and empowerment and how that's a trend. Like this is one you brought to me, and I was like, sounds interesting. Yeah. I'm all ears, so take it away.
I thought of what topics do I often talk about with business owners that makes them just clench up and get really anxious and nervous, and this is one.
Okay.
I would say probably 70% of the time, if I'm talking to a business owner, they're like, I don't know about this. And so I was like, that's great. You need more controversial takes on your 15-Minute Fridays. Right. And so I'm here to be like,
let's do it.
Let's offend someone. I would expect someone to be angry tweeting about this, hopefully.
You know what? Any publicity is good publicity.
Yeah.
And I'll take it. So what is so when we say employee ownership, what is that?
I got to this in a particular way that matters for why I care about this. So I was raised on a farm. And it was the farm, it was, a bunch of acres and a bunch of space and a bunch of barns with a bunch of animals in it, and like in the thousands number. So a lot, and it had a sign out front, and it was like E&J Family Farms. Eric and Jody are my parents. Shout out to them if they're watching this. If I swear, I'm sorry. Also, in that I grew up learning to treat work like I owned it, because we owned it. So when we went on vacation, my work helped do that. Our labor and effort and care, the better we were at that, the more it was ours. It was ours. We owned it. My first two jobs that were not there were, one was in my aunt and uncle's restaurant that they owned, family worked in. We worked in together. However good we did there was how good the family did. Mm-hmm. And my grandpa had a factory that manufactured fireplaces. And one of my first jobs there was cutting 16 feet of steel rod into 1.25-inch pieces in my free time. And I'm sure that was like, hey, high school kid needs $15 to go to the movies, and everybody else at this factory hates doing that job because it's just about as boring as you can imagine. Right, so, right. And you just do it until you literally are like so bored I have to go home. Mm-hmm. Like that's how long you do that job.
That's your shift.
So anyways, I came to this of being like I felt like I owned things. Oftentimes landlords will talk about how their tenants don't take care of the properties. I probably did more. Not probably. I would re-landscape the places I rented. I would fix things. Like apartments were better after I rented them than they were when I moved in, because I just treated stuff like that. I took a rental car through the wash before I returned it when I rented it. And this wasn't so long ago. I just felt like that I'm supposed to do that. And so because I felt like that, I always felt like my effort and output I should own something. Like when I treat things like I own it. Even if I don't, I just sort of act that way. So I think if you don't do that, this might be less interesting to you for sure. Or if you are around a lot of other people who don't do that, it might be less interesting to you. I just grew up around only people who acted that way. Mm-hmm. We took pride in picking up after ourselves or helping people out or doing, all of that stuff. So I say all of that I think I have a story that leads me here. At the same time, I also think we live in an era where entrepreneurship, owning equity, stock options, et cetera, the sort of language of business is starting to be spoken out loud in front of a lot of different types of people. And so we have rappers mentioning their clothing brands that they own in things, or talking about their endorsement deals, or talking about, we have Kylie Jenner is like allegedly a billionaire for selling cosmetics to people, which I don't think she hand makes them. And her, it's not that, it's something else. Rihanna is like, oh, I was a creative, and then I'm this, and then this, and now I'm like running an empire of a bunch of different things, right? And so entrepreneurship is it's not like people secretly have businesses to the side. That's been true for a long time, is people have owned a bunch of different things, right? But now it's like we talk about it all the time. We can learn how many Papa John's or Domino's franchises Shaq owns. Like that starts to be like a random TikTok that pops up in front of my face. People have always owned that stuff. It's just different now. So I say all that to be, we are at this sort of tipping point in history where the masses are starting to understand that they can ask for stock options. They can ask for all their friends who went and work at tech companies are like, yeah, we got this, and options. I got stock options. Sometimes those options aren't actually worth anything, and they go to zero, or there's a whole bunch of ways that those options aren't actually that useful to people. But people want that. People are watching everybody else get it, and now they're starting to be like, I should get this, right? Facebook should give me $1.50 for however much data I give them that they can sell to other people, right? Like that makes sense, right? We're creating a lot of value for these platforms. They should give us something. And so I think there's just more of that swelling up, and there's fewer and fewer places that are acknowledging it. Or it seems like there's this real battle between owners and the people who are creating the value, right? Mm-hmm. So you're starting to see all of this. It's happening in pop culture, it's happening in media in front of a lot of different types of people. And I graduated college 2009, which created a whole bunch of entrepreneurs because people just started freelancing. Companies started liking hiring freelancers. In 2020, we saw another little pop of entrepreneurs start to take place in present day cost of living going up, economic instability. We're not sure about the economy, inflation, all these other things. People start picking up little side hustles. They start doing these other things. And people are starting to experience what is it like to do their stuff. We have interns. We have more interns now than ever who are, when they're applying for our internship, are like, I want to do my own thing. I'm in college right now, and I want to graduate, and I'm going to run my own business. And I'm not going to go do like Gen Z is going to be very entrepreneurial because they just went and watched all of their Gen Z icons, and they watched their millennial older brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts and things like that sort of pick up side hustles and do the other stuff. And they've watched people be fulfilled, proud of their work, all of that stuff, right? So I would say in all of that, I just think there's this swelling trend where people are, it's going to come. And the part of this, it wasn't until I was exposed to one specific book and one company. So there's this company in Illinois called Springfield Remanufacturing Corporation. There's a book written by a fella named Jack Stack, which feels like a fake superhero name.
It does.
But it's the story of Springfield Remanufacturing Corporation, and what they remanufactured old engines, like a very boring factory thing. Short story, the company's going out of business. The factory was going to go be sold off, and the people there were like, we want to keep working here. Like, we want to keep doing this. So they bought the factory, and they kind of had to figure out, like, how do we all own this together, right? And so one of the things that was in that book, and they did this in the 80s. Like, they did this before today, when it wasn't just talked about all the time. And I'm starting to read this book, and you read Jack Stack and his colleagues sort of journaling through making these transitions and lessons they learned. And he uses this phrase that has just stuck with me. And he's like, this is the most common sense way to run a business. My business is better when everybody on my team understands my business, and when everybody understands that if this goes really well, they get something. And I also get something too, right? I get a little smaller piece of the pie, but the pie gets much, much bigger.
Yeah.
And so, like, my caloric intake from my smaller slice of the pie is much higher than if I have everything. And I don't have to worry about somebody on my team or on this team getting frustrated and being like, well, somebody else got this, or they went out and started their own thing. I'd be like, start your own thing. Start it here. I'll fund it. We'll do whatever. What do you need? What do you want to do? What expert do you want to be connected to? Amazing. We're going to bring this over here. You've got a chance. You're going to risk some things. We're all going to risk a little bit, right? But I think there's some upside in all of that. And when a business starts to act that way, famously, Springfield Remanufacturing Corporation became this sort of like epicenter of manufacturing operations. And people travel over the world to go tour their weekly meetings. They go and meet with their line workers of the factory. And the line workers this is my cost. They understood the language of business that they operated with when they were working on a specific piece and part. They understood if it was faster, it was better. They just understood it all. Why wouldn't you want someone to understand what's going on? Not to understand their specific part of the assembly line, but to understand why this assembly line is important to their own job security.
Why.
Yeah.
Understand the why.
Yeah. And so for a lot of people, that equity or that transparency is really about, if you're at a job, if you're an employee somewhere, you're like, I want job security. And you don't always know, does the company you work at have 3 months of your salary in the bank, or 6, or 2 weeks, or, things like that. You should maybe figure that out. It seems like it's very relevant to you. Why wouldn't you want to know that? Or why wouldn't somebody tell you that? It seems like they're trying to keep some information from you. And so I think there's this sort of employee ownership, employee empowerment, or just stake in the outcome, right? If this goes really well, this should go really well for us all. And if this goes really poorly, it should probably go really poorly for us all. And so in all of that, I think, in my experience, I've learned, we've tried to do so many different things because I was trying to do things without really understanding what was going on. I read a cool book, listened to a couple of cool podcasts, and I was like, we're doing this. So we're trying to work through profit sharing, try to work through giving people equity or putting people on a pathway to stock options and all these sorts of things. And I don't really know anything. I'm not a business, whatever. I didn't come that way. I just got to learn this stuff on my own. And you start to learn that people are really excited about helping build things together. The way I got treated when I started to say, hey, here's how much we have in accounts receivable. Here's how we're going to spend this money that we made in profit to provide stability somewhere. And I learned, my wife and I started our business. We have a third business partner now. And a lot of times the owners hold all of this psychic struggle, tension in their own brains. And you can share that too. You can share, I'm like, you have a month, you're like, the revenue's not looking good and the pipeline's not super juicy right now. So we're all stressed. Let's all be stressed about that and all work to solve it. Or just the owners who are keeping hard things away from other people, but it actually affects the other people. They're exposed to that risk. They just don't often get to see it. And so I think I tell the story about me growing up in sort of this ownership culture. I acted as if I owned things. I acted like I was a leader. I was just raised that way, or I was socialized to be that way, right? And I learned later at some point in this book, Great Game of Business, the title is Great Game of Business. The idea is we can break things down into a simple game. We can understand how to play the game, and we can understand how to win at the game together. We can understand the scoreboard. We can make our points go up. Makes a lot of sense, right? We can do this. So I started, there's this phrase in this book, and it clicked with me that much of my life had been what this book calls psychic ownership, where I feel I'm treating things, I'm acting like I'm an owner, and you go read a bunch of business owner or leadership materials, you're going to hear a lot of people starting to say, what do I do to get my employees act like they own this, or treat this like they own it, take ownership of their role or responsibility. And one answer in that long list of answers is maybe make actual ownership accessible to them in a way, right? People do this all the time. Tech companies are doing it all the time. People start as engineers in a tech startup. They're getting stock options. It's like part of your employment package, just standard. And it's not because tech companies are so brilliant they figured out these business models. It's because they're like, we want to make this thing big, and I want everyone to get excited about making it larger. And I think it's a big thing. And I think a lot of business owners or small business owners get really stuck on this thing because they're like, it's not big enough to really share. And I'm like, so as we start in this model, we start to think about how do we want this thing to look over the next 5, 10, 15 years? Like, how do I want this equity to change hands? How do I want that? And there's a lot of, I've got to start really thinking about it. But I have to start getting really serious about saying, do I want employees to get equity in a company that's not really worth that much, but I've tricked them into thinking it is? Or do I want this to be an amazing investment for them? Do I want them to be like, this is going to be awesome for you? It puts a lot of pressure on all of us to say, let's make this business really good, not just seem really good, not have a really nice website or have really cool branding or have like a mission statement and be like, look at all these people, we're making the world better. But to be like, look at our balance sheet, it's awesome. Look at our P&L, it's awesome. And our website's cool, and we're helping people make things better. We can do both. And there's just, I think it changes the whole nature of what you're trying to accomplish out of this. I'm not really trying to extract the most value I can out of my business right now. I'm trying to make the business worth a lot, and I'm trying to make it very attractive for the people on my team to want to have a share of that business. I want them to want it.
Yeah.
Because I want them to make it good for them, and it will make it good for me. And if I make it good for me, it should make it really good for them. And I think that just makes sense. It's just common sense. But it's just often, you start to talk about like putting equity that you own in the hands of another person or getting them even access to it. And you watch people just like, oh, okay, cool. What are we getting for dinner?
Yeah. What else can we talk about?
Yeah. You're like, I don't want to do that. I sort of plan on not sharing that with people. And I'm like, that's fine. But, okay.
And so do you think, like, we've hit our time, but like one of my final questions would be like, do you think a lot of that comes down to like, no matter what the scale of a business is, like let's say someone right now is listening to this, they're a small business, they're like, dude, I've never even thought about the equity thing, I don't even know where to begin. Like, do you think a lot of this is like stripped down to like showing your employees, partners, whatever it may be, the respect that then can turn into them understanding the value of the company? And I don't even mean monetary value. I mean the literal like core value.
What's the communal value of us being connected to each other?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? And I think that respect is a big deal. We talk in our company, we talk about consent often in the workplace, and we choose to do these things. And so having an option to partake in the risk and the upside is important to me. Mandating participation in the risk and the upside is not important to me. I'm not going to make everybody choose to invest like that or think about it that way. If they're like, I want to do this job, and in 3 years I want to go do another job, I want to move that way, I will high five them. That's incredible. I hope to be an amazing space that allows you to do that. And if you want to be here and put the logo of this company on your tombstone, like I think I might, then let's do that. That's cool too. You can kind of engage the way you'd like to. So yeah, I think it's a lot of respect for the individual and also acknowledging the value that they create with the work that they're doing.
Yeah. So is any of that like a last point that you would share with somebody? Like if somebody's listening to this right now who is somebody who maybe you would be coaching or maybe needs some coaching or is just asking you these questions in general of like, okay, like I heard you say a lot of this stuff about employee ownership and empowering my employees, blah, blah, blah. What's the last thing that you're leaving with them if you were to ball everything up?
If you're a business owner, I would challenge you to think about what your life would be like if you had a smaller slice of a larger pie. If you are an employee somewhere, I would challenge you to think about what it would take for you to go to somebody and say this sentence. What does it take for me to gain equity in this company? And finding out the answer to that question. Because if you work at Apple, it's pretty straightforward. You can buy that stock. It's easy. I can buy that stock. That's not hard. But if you work at a small business or some other places, and that's something that you're interested in, you will find out very quickly if your manager or owner is really into you being invested the way they sort of say it is, or are they just hoping for psychic ownership from folks and kind of trying to just get them to think that way, or actually act that way and actually like materialize that. And you'll find out, you know, You'll find out which of those things it is if you ask that question.
Right. Man, dude, this was so good. I sat down for this one being like, I have no idea what
It's
we're
my
about to
favorite
talk
thing,
on,
yeah.
And now I'm like, that was incredible. Dude, that was fun. That was another 15-minute Friday. We did it. If anybody wants to come and talk to you more about any of this sort of stuff, where can they find you or anything that you do?
So I help run a company called the Wonder Jam, which we have a bunch of sister brands. We're mildly confusing, and I'm okay with that. Our sister brands are not confusing. We build websites and logos and take photos for people. So you can check that out. I also have a podcast called The Gem Club where I interview entrepreneurs and creatives and a bunch of really cool folks.
Beautiful. Well, dude, we just made another podcast together.